Welcome in, everybody. This is going to be a fun live stream. I'm super excited that we're doing this. I do not want this to be a crazy live stream. I wanted to go live and talk about everything that's been happening with Charles Bediako. Obviously, I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there, both on the side of just people on Twitter. I think there's a lot of misinformation on YouTube. I think there's a lot of misinformation overall, and I just wanted to talk about it. I've got some different documents I want to share that people that are paying attention to the case may be aware of, some things that you may not be aware of. I want to talk about what it means for Alabama. Some people have asked what would happen. Could Alabama potentially be punished? I think that, you can answer some of those questions. There's a lot of different things like that that I think really can be answered just by what we know for sure today. So I wanted to talk about all that. I wanted to answer some questions down in the chat. So if you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments over on YouTube. Let's be polite in the comments. Let's not go crazy. But I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have. Want to start by saying if you have not seen my video that I put out yesterday, I did put out a video yesterday, and that video was talking all about what my personal thoughts are, right? Today's episode is going to be mostly about what the NCAA can or can't do, or what they have or have not done so far to this point. It doesn't have anything to do with what my personal thoughts are. My personal thoughts, if you ask me, should Charles Bediako be able to play? I actually have two answers. If you ask me overall, should he be able to play? My answer is no. However, my answer is based on what the NCAA has said to this point, and we're going to talk about that later. I think the answer is yes. I do not think that Charles Bediako should be able to play, but I also don't think that a guy like Philip Jovic should be able to play at Auburn, or David Mirkovich from Illinois, or Inaji from Baylor. I think there's plenty of guys that shouldn't be playing, and I think that the answer should be if you played the level of professional basketball, you don't need to be able to play, right? That's the rule that we've set in every other sport. However, the problem that basketball has, and I do understand this is a very unique problem that basketball has, is over in Europe, their basketball is not governed at the schooling level. They have separated schooling and sports. So, in order to play organized sports at a high level, you have to be in schooling, right? So their equivalent of their lower division teams is just their high school ranks. So you can be a professional, but not be what we would consider a professional, right? It would be the equivalent of you playing on like an AAU team here in the States. So obviously, like, that matters, right? They're technically a professional, and I understand that basketball is very unique in that sense, and I don't want to, come out and say that it's not, because I know a lot of people are gonna, come at me and say, "Oh, it's very different," because basketball has pro ranks that aren't the top level, and I understand that. However, I do think that once you've played the top level in plenty of these places, for example, the Euro League, I think that should disqualify you from being able to play in college basketball. I could make the same argument about the G League. Once you decide to go to the G League, you don't need to be able to come play college basketball. Um, and that's what people are arguing. The funny part about the argument with Charles Bediako is one of two things. One, the argument is he went into high school, or he went into college, he forfeited his eligibility, and now he's trying to come back. And yes, that's a true statement. However, there's a little bit of nuance to that. One, the question comes, how did he forfeit his eligibility? You could say, well, he left college and then came back. There's no rule in the NCAA bylines that say you have to play continuously. You're allowed to take a break. So that obviously isn't the answer. The other question is, okay, it's when he went into the NBA draft. That's where James Inaji comes into play with Baylor. They allowed Najee to play 4 years. He's eligible to play 4 years starting this season. And that is somebody who was drafted and signed developmental deals with the NBA. So just G League type developmental deals, and then ended up playing professionally over in Europe. So then that immediately rules out you can't just say it's because of the fact that he went into the NBA draft, because you're not forced into the NBA draft, even in Najee's case. You can't say it's because he just left college and came back because there's no rule against it. So the question is, what legal bearing do they have to go to? And we're going to go through the bylaws and stuff. I have plenty of things I want to pull up. I'm going to give some sources. There's plenty of Twitter accounts that I think are doing a really, really good job breaking down the facts of the case. I will source them and credit them, as we kind of go through this. But I think those are the big things. If you ask me, I don't think that any professionals at the highest level should be able to compete in college basketball. I think that about Charles Bediako, and I think I could name 20 other guys that are currently playing in college basketball that nobody said anything about, but I think they also should not be allowed. However, I also think that the way the NCAA has currently laid it out, that he should be eligible to play, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So first things first, I want to start by going through what Bediako's legal case was. Like, what was their legal thing that they laid out as saying, this is what we think, this is our case for why we think that Bediako should be able to play. So I'm going to pull up what that is. So we're going to pull this up. Sorry. Get the overlay out of the way. So part of his legal case says in just the last month, the NCAA has reinstated a former G League player who had over $1 million in professional career earnings, almost twice the amount earned by Bediako. An international player who, unlike Mr. Bediako, was actually drafted in the draft, played in multiple professional seasons for one of the premier professional teams overseas. That's referring to Najee. And then multiple other players with G League experience. Additionally, on or about September 30th, the NCAA granted eligibility to Therian Darlin, former G League Ignite player who played in 58 G League games over 2 seasons, allowing him to compete in Division I at Santa Clara, with his G League seasons counting against his eligibility. Similarly, in recent months, the NCAA has reinstated players like London Johnson and Abdullah Ahmed, who have comparable or more extensive professional experiences than Mr. Bediako. These actions demonstrate the NCAA's selective and inconsistent applications of its rules, rendering its denial of Mr. Bediako's waiver arbitrary and capricious, right? So that's their argument. Their argument is there are players that have played in the G League, there are players that have been drafted, there are players that have made more money than him that y'all have reinstated. And this is what it really gets down to when you're talking about the flimsiness of the NCAA's case. The flimsiness of the NCAA's case is that they have reinstated people and they have not done it blanket across the board. They didn't say, this is what we're going to reinstate you for, and this is what we're not going to. They have overarching changed what their justifications are and have not done basic, you get 4 years, you get 5 years, right? They have not done basic, you can play in professional, but you get 5 years experience. I don't care if it's professional, G League, where, right? They haven't done that. They have allowed some people, as they said with Darlin, to have G League Ignite, have his count against him. Then they have Najee, where his experience overseas doesn't count against him at all. There's plenty of things that happen in this, right? Then you go to the NCAA's bylaws, right? Part of the other argument in this, it says the NCAA's rules also create an entirely arbitrary distinction between the student athletes who go directly from high school to professional and those who initially enroll in college but later leave for the draft and then seek to return. The bylaw provides that before initial full-time college enrollment, an individual may compete on a professional team, provided the individual does not receive more than actual and necessary expenses to participate on the team. Right? That more than actual and necessary expenses is where they're going back to the prior case of somebody having over $1 million of professional career earnings. Their bylaws state you can't have that much money, yet they're allowing somebody that made that much money to go. See, Rob, I saw what you said, and we're going to bring that up here in just a second. I completely agree with you. And I think that doesn't exactly matter in this case, but I will bring that up here in just 1 second. Additionally, it says, in other words, the NCAA has arbitrarily determined that it's acceptable for a student athlete to compete professionally, either international or straight out of high school, and then compete in college, but it is not acceptable to compete in college, leave to pursue, and then return as a student athlete. There's no principled justification for treating these students differently, right? The CFB nerds over on Twitter who have kind of put all this together. One of the guys is a lawyer by practice, so he is who helped put some of this stuff together. I just kind of pulled these from some that he had. Some of the rest of it I kind of pulled myself, but really shout out to those guys. I retweeted it earlier today. If you're interested, he had a whole write up about it. I don't want to go through it. I don't want to waste you guys' time, but really would recommend you read it if you have not. Now, really quick to get to what C. Rob was saying. He says, I feel like I don't like the precedent, but I'm glad we may have him as an Alabama fan. 100%. I think that the precedent is a problem, right? I think the precedent that you're setting is an issue, but I think that the only way to get the rule to change is to set the precedent, right? For example, this would have never taken place if Najee and other G League guys weren't approved, right? They set the precedent, and then somebody takes the next step. Eventually, what's going to happen is Congress is going to have to step in. And the way that we know for a fact that Congress is going to have to step in is we go to the NCAA's official statement that they put out after the TRO. We're going to talk about the TRO here in a minute, but the NCAA's official statement that they put out after the thing says these attempts to sidestep the NCAA rules and recruit individuals who have finished their time and signed NBA contracts are taking away opportunities from high school students. We'll talk about that in a second. A judge ordering the NCAA let former NBA player take the court Saturday against college athletes is why Congress must step in and empower college sports to enforce our eligibility rules. Right. One thing really quick, super easy. Saying you're taking away from high school students is hilarious. Bediako, by all rules, is only allowed to compete this semester. No high school student could compete this semester per the guidelines because you have to be enrolled in college. There are other things you have to adhere to. Bediako is enrolled in college, so he's not taking away from a high school student. That's just completely bogus. I don't know why they even put that in their statement. But then when you go to the second thing, the end of their statement says is why Congress must step in and empower college sports to enforce our eligibility rules. They're admitting right there they can't enforce their eligibility rules. The only way they can enforce it is if Congress steps in. Part of the reason that is they are in all 50 states. They are not a legal governing body, or they're a governing body, but they're not a legal entity. So they are not able to do something outside of what the law says. And that is the reason why the TRO, even though people are going to argue it was by a Tuscaloosa judge, we'll talk about that as well. But, at the end of the day, that is the reason why it is now able to be happened is the TRO says it is. NCAA can't do anything about it. It is now legally binding, and there's nothing you can say until 10 days is up or until the injunction is heard. The injunction will be heard on the 10th. We will get more clarification. On Tuesday, we'll get more clarification on Tuesday. But they know they can't do anything, which is the reason why they're saying Congress must step in. Yeah. And C-Rob, your point exactly, right? It's infuriating that other European pros and guys at Baylor or others have been able to play. That's my argument, right? My argument is very clear. I don't think any of them should be able to play. Again, I said that in my podcast yesterday, the video I recorded that I'm sure most of you saw. I don't think any professional basketball players should be able to play college basketball. Full stop. And if that was the case, we wouldn't be having this argument right now. If you played in professional, you wouldn't be playing in college. Done. However, we crossed that bridge already. They're allowing people to play professional, and now that you're allowing people to play professional, you can't backtrack your guidelines. Right? So that's really the big thing. Really quick before I throw my overlay back on, a couple of things I want to talk about as it relates to this TRO. So I just threw the TRO up on the screen. So this TRO is a temporary restraining order, and this is what is allowing Bediako to play through Tuesday. Officially, it's through for 10 days. However, it also says at the end that it's until the next injunction hearing. The injunction hearing is going to be happening on Tuesday before the Missouri game. So the only game that we can guarantee that he will be eligible to play for is the Tennessee game. Is going to be happening on Saturday. I will be in attendance. I'm sure it's going to be ridiculous, but I'm super excited for that game. So the temporary restraining order basically says, number one, they're restrained from applying or enforcing its bylaws or any other rules to deny his eligibility to compete in D1 athletics for the University of Alabama, right? So what's happening? He's allowed to play. Step one, he's allowed to play. Number two, on the basis of the foregoing, he's immediately eligible to participate in team activities, including but not limited to meetings, practices, and games. That means he's able to practice, he's able to meet with the team, he's able to play in games. Doesn't matter, you can't enforce your bylaws. Number three is the most important thing that I think most people, and I'm counting Mark Pope in this one, I'm counting the UConn guys in this one, I'm counting a ton of people in this one, did not pay attention. I will say Seth Davis did a good job pointing it out. A lot of other people has as well. But he's kind of pointed at his other guys that like, hey, what are you doing? Number three, the defendant, the NCAA, is further restrained from threatening, imposing, or attempting to impose, suggesting or implying any penalties or sanctions on Mr. Bediako or the University of Alabama or its coaches or other student athletes as a result of his participation under the rule of restitution, and it gives the NCAA bylaw, right? So what does this mean? It means you can't hurt them on seed lines. You can't revoke their win if they win the game. There's nothing legally that the NCAA can do, because all of those would be considered imposing or penalties and sanctions. And if you do that, you can be held in contempt of court. If you're held in contempt of court, it's fines, it's jail time, it's legal implications, right? We stated earlier the NCAA does not have the legal bearing, which is why they're asking Congress for Congress's help. This is legally binding, right? I understand some people are going to argue it's a Tuscaloosa judge. If you look at Trinidad Chambliss's case, it was a judge in Oxford. If you look at Ty and Grant Foster's case, it was a judge in Spokane. If you look at Darian Mintz's case, it was a judge in Duke, right? All of these cases had judges in their local jurisdictions. That's how this works. You have a judge in your local jurisdiction because you assume they're going to be more favorable to your case. It's the reason why you can file in civil court wherever you want to file, as long as the person is doing business there, right? So since the NCAA does business in all 50 states, they can legally file it wherever they want to file it. And of course, Tuscaloosa is the best place to file it. That's the place you got the best chance to win. That's just smart business, right? So super hilarious. Like at the end of the day, again, this is legally binding. Then you go to, finally the last part. It says this order remains in effect and shall remain in effect for 10 days, or until the hearing of the plaintiff's motion or preliminary injunction is conducted. And then if you look at number 6, the preliminary injunction is going to be taking place on the 27th of January, which is next Tuesday at 9 a.m. In the courtroom, right? I know a lot of people, last thing I want to cover while I've got, kind of split screen up, is a lot of people are questioning the fact that the judge has donated to the University of Alabama. And I will come out and say that I wish that he had not, right? I wish that this was not going to be something that people were pointing to, because I think that it doesn't impact the case at all. And that's actually what I have up on the screen. Is there was a court case that was tried, funny enough, about Alabama. This was about Alabama football, but there was a case that Alabama was involved in, Wu versus Thomas, in the 11th Circuit of Appeals. And it was talking about how Judge Gwynn had multiple connections. He was a fan who had been given priority football tickets and stuff. And they said the court held that no reasonable observer would assume that he had extrajudicial knowledge of the case and his impartiality based on the connections. So they cited precedent saying school ties are insufficient to disqualify a judge, right? Now, does it mean you can't recuse yourself? No. Again, in Darian Mintz's case, the judge recused himself because he was a Duke basketball season ticket holder. So judges can recuse themselves, but the law states that they don't have to. So, I mean, there's plenty of precedent in this case, right? When you're looking at everything that's going on, there is precedent in this case as to why you wouldn't recuse yourself. There is precedent in this case as to why Alabama can play him with no fear of repercussions, right? Because again, if they have repercussions, they can hold the NCAA in contempt of court. They're not going to do that. Again, if you thought that the NCAA was going to do that, this statement right here tells you they're not going to. If they're asking Congress to say we can't enforce our rules, they know that they're going to let him play and they're not going to do a thing about it because they know, even though some of the people out there keep saying, oh, just like ban them from the NCAA tournament or all these things, the NCAA is not going to do that. They're not stupid, right? They're not going to be held in contempt of court. They're just not going to do it. Yeah. C-Rob, everybody's talking to the local Georgias because, of course, they have the best chance of ruling in your favor. Yeah, that's how that works. 100% that's how that works. So I mean, absolutely that's what's going to happen. And again, Washington did it with Gonzaga did it with Tyron Grant Foster. Baylor didn't have to do it with Najee because the NCAA deemed him eligible, which is a whole different argument. Trinidad Chambliss is going to be done. It's being done in Oxford. There's plenty of these cases where these injunctions are all done in places where you feel more confident that you're going to win the case. That's just how good court practice is done at this point, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that, right? Like some people are going to be upset, but there's not a whole lot that people can say about it. My favorite is, people trying to tell me like, if you don't like the law, then change it. I've got somebody in my mentions right now trying to tell me that. Yeah, that's the problem. NCAA can't make laws. And at the end of the day, the only way the rule is going to change is if somebody does this. Now, there's going to be plenty of arguments that, oh, Alabama's the bad guy because Alabama's the one doing it. And sure, okay, Alabama can play the bad guy role in this case. But somebody was going to do it. Somebody in the NCAA was going to have to do this exact thing and have to fight the case to eventually the NCAA is going to crumble as we know it. Something else is going to be put into place, and then rules will be more enforceable. If clear example, Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson declares for the NFL draft. He gets a $6 million offer from Miami. He never declared for the portal. It's well known that you can't contact a player while they're not in the portal. Yet every person who is a college sports fan knows that schools do it. Every school, right? And that's across the board. Every school has tampered at some point or another. It's against the NCAA rules. Nobody's been punished for it. Again, they can't punish anyone for it because they don't have the legal bearing, right? There's plenty of these things where like nothing has been punished. And if it's not being punished, then of course you're going to break the rules, right? Like the roster limits on how much money you can spend in football, they're all being broken, right? They're all being broken. The fact that you can't guarantee NIL money, you can only technically guarantee rev share money. Do you think that Kentucky's roster wasn't 22 million guaranteed? Do you think that roster was just, oh, like we think we're going to get you this? No, they signed them based on, hey, we're going to give you this much money. Like these rules have all been broken. And the only way that they're going to be changed is if somebody breaks the rules. Somebody's going to have to break them. Laws are going to have to be passed. And once the laws are passed, it will set precedent. And then that's what you'll go with moving forward. So actually, it's funny enough, even though the NCAA is really funny that they're arguing, hey, we need Congress to do something because we can't do anything. That's what's going to have to happen, right? Congress is going to have to step in and say, this is what's going to happen moving forward. And then that's the rules that are going to be used moving forward, right? Because the NCAA is going to cease to exist as it currently is because they are being absolutely dominated in court, case after case after case, because they have no legal standing, right? And part of the problem of them having no legal standing is their rules have been unjustly shown. And that goes to the Bediako case that we just talked about, right? The amount of money that he's been allowed, that other people have been allowed to make, how long they've been able to play in the G League. There's plenty of reasons why he's been able to do these things. But again, those things are what causes the NCAA to have no legal standing. And then when they have no legal standing, then they get their butt kicked in court. And that's what's happening, right? Because they're not doing things the way they should have been doing, then that's what goes with it. Yeah. It's when you're talking about tampering, C-Rob's talking about tampering on this one. when there's all of us doing it, people are calling us out, right? Miami called out Alabama. Oh, they're tampering with their running back, as if they didn't tamper with Ty Simpson like 3 weeks ago. I mean, Ty Simpson had to come out in his official statement and say, I didn't want to go somewhere else. I wanted to leave my legacy at Alabama because he had been tampered with so much. Like, we all knew what the dollar values of those offers were, even though he was never in the portal. So I don't understand why you're trying to say that, oh, Alabama's doing something other people shouldn't be. We're all doing it. What are you talking about? Like, if everybody's tampering, then what's the argument, right? At the end of the day, if we know you tried to offer Ty Simpson $6.5 million, why are you mad at me for stealing your running back? We know what you did, right? Like, it's not a coincidence that Prince will from Ole Miss enters the portal and 7 minutes later commits to LSU. Of course he was going to LSU. Of course they tampered with him. Like, duh. Like, that's what happened. Like, absolutely. Yes. It's the reason why they didn't want Lane Kiffin to coach. They knew he was going to be tampering with their guys long enough. You at least didn't want him in the locker room tampering with them. But I mean, at the end of the day, all these things, Alabama's doing it, and other teams are as well. And it simply goes back to, I know you said it earlier, C. Rob, and I did as well. If the European pros and guys like Najee from Baylor, or Najee at Baylor that got drafted, and your G League Ignite guys are playing, and all these different guys are playing currently in college basketball and have been approved by the NCAA. Very important, not just that they're playing, but that they were deemed eligible by the NCAA. They're not the TRO guys, right? This isn't a Ty and Grant Foster where he's playing on a TRO. This is the NCAA has deemed them as eligible to play, right? So they are fully stamped by you're allowed to play. If the NCAA was not doing that for those guys, then Bediako would not be the case right now. Like, Bediako would not currently be under a TRO if the NCAA was not allowing other athletes to play in college basketball that had played professional ranks. The NCAA allowing those others is what is allowing Bediako, not the opposite. People think that Bediako just came out of thin air. Ooh, poof, Alabama wanted a new guy. I mean, sure. Yes, he makes the team much better. Yes, he's a clear need. Like, absolutely. But Alabama wouldn't even have that as an option if the NCAA didn't clear a bunch of European pros and then the G League Ignite guys and then Najee that got drafted. Once you clear all those guys, now you're opening the floodgates. The NCAA is who opened the floodgates. And the funny part is everybody's pointing at Bediako like he's the bad guy. No, he just said, hey, somebody else got drafted. I didn't get drafted. Like, if he can play, why can't I? And again, 5-year window, right? That's the most important thing that people are missing here. Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to bring back this guy who played 10 years ago. 5-year window. Once you start playing, you have 5 years to complete your 4 years of eligibility. Bediako has only completed, this semester will finish his 5th year of eligibility. So this semester is the last time he will be able to play. And that goes to, it's hard for the NCAA to say you're stealing from a high school kid when a high school kid couldn't play in the middle of the semester. It's hard to say you're stealing from, right? Like, their argument is, oh, they're stealing from high school kids. No. The only guys who could commit is European pros or other pros, and you have to be enrolled in school. Oh, yeah. Oklahoma, that team that Alabama just beat on the road in Norman, they had a guy from Russia that was previously playing in the Russian professional basketball. They realized they had a need at the center position. So what did they do? They filled it with a Russian European center. He immediately was eligible. Was there outrage about he was stealing a spot from a high school guy? Did you see any single argument that the guy from Oklahoma that Alabama just played was stealing a spot from a high school guy? Nobody saw anything about somebody stealing a spot from a high school guy. If you're not stealing a spot from a high school guy, then what do you mean? Charles, do you think Bediako will actually play minutes Saturday or just suit up? I was originally, I will come out and say, I actually texted a couple of people about this. I was originally under the mindset that Nate Oates was going to wait until the injunction was heard on Tuesday. However, I think that Nate Oates is forcing the issue. And I think that what came out yesterday by the Field of 68 when it was said by Nate Oates, and I'll pull up the official quote from Nate that Jeff Goodman put out. But the Field of 68, put out yesterday that, let me get it pulled up. That Nate Oates was going to be playing. Yeah, here we go. It was breaking news. Nate Oates plans to play Bediako at home on Saturday. Source told Field of 68. I'd be shocked if that source was not Nate Oates, if you don't want to be full on honest. I know that Jeff Goodman has a good relationship with Nate and with Gonzo and those guys, so I'd be shocked if that was not direct from the horse's mouth. Jeff would not put that out if he did not know for a fact it was true. But simple fact when you're talking about this, I thought that Nate was going to wait. And at this point, it feels like Nate is like, I don't care. Everybody else is doing it. So am I. And at the end of the day, he knows that not only is the TRO been granted, it is a very, 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 very high likelihood that he will be granted the rest of the season based on all the stuff we've talked about already at this point. And it doesn't really matter one way or the other. Even if he does play and you lose, even if you do play and you win, it's not like you're going to cause that game to now be a loss because he played, even if they flip the TRO. Again, the way the TRO was written, you can't punish Alabama. So I think that Nate's going to play him. I tweeted out, and I hope that he does it. I hope that Nate Oates plays him and starts him just for the crowd pop at the beginning of the game. I don't care if Sherrill is your starter because, I'm of the mindset Sherrill is your starter. He's had 21 and 22 points in back-to-back games. Sherrill is your starting big man, but I want him to start Bediako, even if you call a timeout and pull him right after. Cool. I want him to start him just so the crowd can go crazy. But I do honestly think he's going to play him. And I think, honestly, against Tennessee, against a guy like Jalen Carey, that's such a good offensive rebounder, honestly, having him and having Bediako in his, length and his ability to rebound would be a big deal. I think that we could use him against Tennessee. It's pretty open about my thoughts about Noah Williamson this season. I think that Bediako immediately gives you a backup center that can actually rebound, that can actually compete. So, absolutely, I think that he plays. And I think that Nate just doesn't care at this point. Obviously, all these things have been done. I think that Nate's like, screw it, just play him. This is one of my favorite ones, C-Rob. He's still not even in the top 10 oldest players in college basketball right now. He's like 3 years younger than Chad Baker-Mazara, and there's no argument over people whether Baker-Mazara should be playing right now. And he's almost 3 years younger. Tyron Grant Foster. Tyron Grant Foster is like 26. He's playing. There's plenty of other guys that are playing that are much older than Charles Bediako. So everybody that's arguing that, he's 23 years old is hilarious. There's plenty of guys that are 23 years old. Matter of fact, last year's Auburn team, I think the average age on that team was 23.2. So he's younger than the average age for last year's Auburn team. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Yeah, Baylor's Najee got 4 years of eligibility, right? This whole Charles Bediako case is over, 18 games. This is an 18-game eligibility case. Najee got 4 years. So that's hilarious to me. That's the one that's like the most funny to me. Yeah. All the questions, right? You didn't even know these guys were European pros because you didn't hear about it, right? Arkansas has 2 European pros on their team. Oklahoma has one that they added. Oklahoma is the unique part is they added him mid-season. Versus like an Illinois had Mirkovic, whereas Mirkovic started the season. So Mirkovic is a guy that obviously we played against, really, really good player, but he started the season for Illinois. Oklahoma literally added their center the game like 2 games before us. Like they added him in the middle of the season, right at the beginning of the new semester, because he enrolled in classes and then immediately started playing right after the new semester. So Oklahoma is a very unique situation. With Auburn, it's Jovic, and he's been on the team all season. He was not a midseason addition, but again, nobody talked about him because it wasn't Alabama. So do you think he starts, and do you think will be the only game you play? I mean, if he loses at the hearing, yeah, it's the only game he's going to play because officially the TRO is only in effect for 1 game since the hearing is going to be happening at 9 a.m. the morning of the next game. So officially, the only game he's guaranteed to be able to play is this one. I am personally under the mindset, and I, was in an argument with an Auburn fan earlier today about it. I bet $250 on him. And that's an open bet with whoever wants to make it. If you don't believe me, that Charles Bediako is going to get his eligibility granted by the court system. Right now, officially, it's not going to be NCAA eligibility, but he is going to play more than just the Tennessee game. Let me put it that way. The court system will allow him to continue playing. I think the case is super strong, and the NCAA has dug their grave because of how poorly they have adjudicated this so far. I think that it's going to be pretty clear that he's going to be able to play. Does he start? Honestly, I don't know. I would love to see him start. Like I said, I think the crowd pop would be incredible. I'm going to be there, so I think it would be fun. But I don't know if he starts or not. That's a question for Nate Oates. And honestly, the next time that Nate Oates gets in front of a microphone, I'm sure he's going to be asked it. I'm assuming he has a press conference tomorrow since I didn't see him on the presser today. So I'm assuming he's going to have a press conference tomorrow in advance of the Tennessee game on Saturday, but I'm not 100% certain on that. I would just assume it's tomorrow since I didn't see any press conference updates today. What other questions you guys got? But yeah, no, it's super funny to me that there's plenty of pros that are older than Bediako, that have had more experience than Bediako, that have made more money than Bediako, have played in better leagues than Bediako. I mean, the G League is decent, but it's nowhere near like the Euro League over in Europe. The Euro League over in Europe, people make millions of dollars, and like these guys in some cases will play over there and turn down role player spots in the NBA, like in the full NBA, not the G League, will turn down role player spots in the full NBA because they're making more money over in Europe, right? Dante Hall is a great example. Dante Hall was making like over $1 million at Monaco, and he was staying at Monaco because he didn't want like he was turning down NBA stuff because he wanted to just stay where he was at. And there's plenty of guys that are doing that. So this is a very crazy situation where people are like, oh, European basketball is not as good. Yeah, I mean, the top of the European basketball is elite. And so, like, arguing that him playing in the G League is even on the same tier as Euro League is hilarious to me. Now, if you want to say it's on the same tier as like some of the lower level Euro League stuff, sure, I would agree with that. But Euro League is really elite basketball, and there's a reason why those guys get paid so much, especially with the time that it's been. Do you think it will affect chemistry? Honestly, no. I don't know if you've seen Amari Allen. I wish I would have pulled it up, but Amari Allen had a post on Instagram where he was basically, put some emojis out. Seemed like he was super excited with Bediako. I think the team knows that they could use another center. Um, I think that everyone is acutely aware of their deficiencies in the front court. And so I do think that because of that, I think that they're super happy to super happy to have him. Shame it happened now and not earlier in the season. Honestly, I agree. 100%. We would be a 1 or 2 loss team right now if our front court was stronger. Yes, that's a true statement. I think that you could have beaten Gonzaga with a better front court. I think that Arizona was having too good of a shooting night, and how you were playing them versus how well they shot the three. I think that Arizona probably still beats you. I think that a better front court definitely wins you the Purdue game. I think that it definitely wins you the Gonzaga game. And then I think that it definitely wins you um the Texas game for sure. I'm trying to see what else. Yeah, I think you definitely win the Texas game with a better front court, the Gonzaga game, and the Purdue game with a better front court. Um, the Vandy game, I think losing LeBaron Fallon was the answer. Your front court was not the issue, and how good they were in the back court was going to give you some problems. Could you have maybe beaten Vandy? Yeah, maybe. I just don't want to guarantee the Vandy win. I think the LeBaron Fallon injury was a much bigger problem. But against Vandy, you would have at least had a center, whereas you didn't have Aiden Sherrill in that game. And so you would have had a center in the game. So, maybe you could make the argument you would have beaten Vandy as well. So I mean, I could make a real argument you would have only lost one game, with that game being to Arizona, just because I thought they were shooting too well that night. You could maybe make the argument that Gonzaga, yeah, the free throws as well being obviously a major issue, C Rob. But I mean, like I said, with LeBaron Fallon being out in that game, that's really the bigger issue in that game, obviously. But the fact that you never had Aiden Sherrill at all, if you had Bediako, that at least gives you a real center for that game. So, like I said, I definitely could make an argument that he would help win that game. But in my mind, if there was two that you said, "Hey, we lost two games," personal with a better front court, I would say the games that you lost were Arizona and Vanderbilt. Personally, just because of the weirdness around that Vanderbilt game. Absolutely not. Um, I 100% it's not his worst team. His worst team was 2022 when Alabama went 9-9 in conference, lost to Vanderbilt and lost to Notre Dame in the first round of the NCAA tournament. That was J.D. Davison, Jaden Shackford, Javon Quinterly. By far Alabama's worst team. I understand that team also beat Gonzaga in Houston. That team also lost to Georgia, was their only win in conference that year. That team also lost to Rick Pitino's Iona team. That team, I understand Javon Quinterly tore his ACL, but absolutely 22 was the worst team. In my mind, that's not even close. Yeah, I mean, you could argue his first year, but I'm not counting his first year on that one. I definitely would consider 22 as by far the worst team. I will say, and I've thought about wearing my Final Four shirt, but the big thing about Charles Bediako that honestly upsets me the most isn't that he's coming back, right? Obviously, super excited to have him back, but it's how he left and why he left, right? For those of you unaware why Charles Bediako left, and funny enough, there's been some people talking about it, but Charles Bediako is from Canada, right? If he was not from Canada, Bediako would never have left the University of Alabama, right? He was from Canada, and so because of that, there were rules around how you were allowed to be paid on the type of visa and stuff that he was on, right? So he was not allowed to be paid in the same way that the other college athletes were, right? That's actually the reason why Alabama scheduled the Alabama Purdue game in Toronto, because they were going to use that game to help get around the pay rules for Charles Bediako, because they were going to just pay him for the game that was in Canada. And then he's not earning money outside of Canada, right? So that game was scheduled to help get him money. However, if you remember, he did not play in that game, because when he entered the NBA draft, that the one that everybody's talking about, he then stayed in the NBA draft and went undrafted. And most people are under the impression that he should have come back for at least one more season. And if he had come back for one more season, that team, let's just remember who all was on that team. That would have been the 2024 Alabama team that went to the Final Four, that had Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, Rylan Griffin, Grant Nelson, Muhammad Diabate, Nick Pringle, Sam Walters, Mo McGee, Davin Cosby, Latrell Reitzel, and Jaron Stevenson, right? Mo McGee would not have been on that team, because the only reason Mo McGee got added to that team was because Charles Bediako stayed in the draft so late, and McGee was like the only guy available that we could get. So he was the backup center we had to grab. But the starting lineup for that team would have been Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, Rylan Griffin, Grant Nelson, and Charles Bediako. You would have had plenty of length. You would have actually been able to slide Grant Nelson to the 4, where his natural position was. You saw how much better he was at the 4 his next season, when he had Chuck there, or sorry, when he had Cliff there, right? So a much bigger deal when you had Grant Nelson at the 4. If you had Chuck back, you could have had Grant Nelson at the 4, would have been a huge deal. And then when you're competing up against teams like North Carolina and then inevitably UConn, which is who ended up putting us out in Phoenix, you actually would have had somebody to match up with Donovan Clingan, right? You actually would have had somebody to match up, right? When you look at that 2024 team and some of the teams they lost to Purdue by 6. If you have Chuck, that you could have matched up with Zach Edey, right? You lost to Arizona. You could have matched up better in that one. You lost to Tennessee. Like all these games, like you could have matched up substantially better in those games. But again, the most important one being the game that you ended up losing to put you out of the tournament was UConn. And I'm not saying you beat UConn, because that UConn team was elite and had an awesome offense. Donovan Clingan was incredible. But I think that you have a way better chance if you have an elite center like Bediako that's back in his 3rd season, right? Like 3rd season Bediako against Donovan Clingan. I really like my chances in that game, especially with how Alabama shot the ball in that game. I mean, if I remember correctly, and I would be curious, yeah, Alabama shot the ball 47.8% from 3 that game. Alabama went 11 of 24 for 3 that game. Alabama, lost on both glasses, both the offense and defensive glass. I mean, UConn was dominant with the assist numbers. Clingan had 4 blocks. But at the end of the day, Alabama with Bediako in that game had a real legit shot. I'm not saying they win it, but they have a shot. And that's honestly the thing that hurts me the most, is the fact that Bediako got such bad advice and didn't come back. C. Robbie said we would have never went for Canada if not for him. 100%. Nate Oates said it. Nate Oates said it in the final press conference. We scheduled this game for Charles. It was supposed to be Charles versus Zach in their hometown. It was supposed to be for Charles versus Edey in Canada, and that was going to be our way around getting money paid to Bediako. That's what Alabama scheduled that game for. And they were unable to use it to do so because he left in the offseason prior. And from one of the reports I heard from somebody that I know that was fairly closely related to the Austin Spurs, which is the very first team he was at, Bediako was broke. He had gotten very, 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 basically no money from UA, and was not living the standard NIL, previous NIL lifestyle that most athletes that you see are living. He was broke. And that was because Alabama was unable to pay him. When Bediako checks in Coleman, it's going to be nuts, 100%. And that's why I would love to see if he just starts him, because if not, it's going to be him going to the bench, or him going to the scores table. And I think obviously that would still be crazy as well, but I would love to see if they started him. It would be kind of funny. Honestly, I have no idea about that question, because the weather has shifted north. Saturday is actually going to be, it's going to be raining pretty much all day. However, it's not going to be cold enough where it's going to be freezing yet. So there shouldn't be any ice. The weather's going to suck, but I don't think there's going to be any ice. So my gut says they're not going to move the game. Since the weather has shifted far enough north and there's not going to be snow and ice. So my gut says they're going to leave it alone, but I'm not 100% sure. I also would assume there's going to be a decent amount of national media at this game or covering this game because of the Bediako factor, more than their standard would be. So I don't know if that plays any factor into it as well, but there will be more people, at this game and interested in this game from a media perspective than there typically are. So I would be very curious to see, if that impacts anything at all. But I think the big consensus, and this is something I also tweeted out. Jake Thompson is a Tennessee fan, funny enough, but he's a NIL lawyer. And it is the thing that I have seen the most out of the NIL attorneys that are weighing in on Twitter. Pretty much all of them agree that it's fairly sound legal advice, that the NCAA has been stupid in their different ways that they have adjudicated this. Um, I think that is the thing that is pretty consistent across all the different lawyers that have looked at the case, is how poorly the NCAA has, taken this to court and has done the things over the time, right? The only thing the NCAA has really consistently won in court is the 5 years window thing, which is what Bediako is under, right? So which is the place where he has the most consistent. Um, Honestly, Charles, I have zero idea with that question. I don't know. My gut would say he forfeited his contract because he left, and so he's not getting paid, and we're now paying him, is what my gut says. But honestly, I have zero idea as to how the financials behind this one work. Um, I'm sure they will figure it out. And at the end of the day, like, if Alabama needs to find money to pay Betty Iko, they will find it. Right. I'm not sure how the pay side of this one is working. It would be a very curious thing to find out. I'm not sure that we ever will find it out. But my gut says on the NBA side that because he left the team to come back to college, he just forfeited the money, because I'm sure it's not a guaranteed pay over there, because it's a two-way or Exhibit 10 or whatever he was currently on. So I would be sure that he's not guaranteed that money, but I'm not sure as to how the pay on the other side is working. I'm sure that Alabama's just picking up the bill, or the athletic department slash Alabama's picking up the bill. I guess I should say it's not going to be the taxpayers. What other questions you guys got? I got a few more minutes. I don't want to go forever here. Yeah, so at season's end, will he re-enter the NBA draft or what? Honestly, he's not going to get drafted, so no. Honestly, at season's end, he probably goes back to the G League. I think he probably goes back to where he was, or and sees if he can get a shot in the G League. Um, since they've been signing two-way deals with him, or Exhibit 10s, my gut says he gets another two-way or Exhibit 10 with the NBA, and then eventually either goes over to Europe or stays in the NBA G League before he can get to the NBA. At the end of the day, he's going to be able to play basketball as long as he wants to, because he's a skilled 7-footer. If he wants to go over to Europe and play, they will be able to offer him a contract in one of their leagues, I'm sure. If not, I'm sure that he would just go back to the G League, but he's definitely not going to enter the draft. I mean, the NBA draft is all about potential. And when you have a guy that's been in the G League that amount of time, you know what he is. It's not a potential thing at that case anymore. So if you're not talking about potential, you're talking about legitimacy, then he's just not going to get drafted. There's no sense in even entering. Um, since at least December the 27th. And I have that specific date in mind because of what you saw Preston Murphy tweet out about the Sora video, when the NCAA started allowing people, basically talking about signing the Giants and then showing back up with them. I think that he very clearly saw the writing on the wall of what was going to happen. And I think that because of that, that is the reason why Charles Bediako was enrolled in classes, right? This was not thought of overnight. The fact that Charles Bediako was enrolled in classes and ready to go meant that this was something that they kind of had in their back pocket for the last few weeks at a minimum. So I'm going to say somewhere around the end of December at a minimum, maybe before that, but I'm thinking probably like end of December, based on just what you saw in videos and Twitter posts, and when you started hearing rumblings. That's kind of what I would assume. I appreciate it, C Rob. Thank you so much. We're gonna try to keep putting out videos, a couple times a week. Probably the next video that's going to come out is going to be on Sunday. I may record some shorts or something with all this Bediako stuff going on. But the next full length podcast is going to come out on Sunday, talking about the Tennessee breakdown, win or loss, of course. And then also going to break down the Missouri game that's going to happen on Tuesday. He's going to ride the pine just like he has been. Simply put, if Noah Williamson doesn't show the guy that he was in Kentucky game and show his ability to be on the court and not foul, and honestly, that's the big thing, right? There are multiple games this season where he was on the court for 3 minutes and had 4 fouls. If he doesn't show an ability to do something more than that, he's going to ride the bench. And I wish that that wasn't the fact and that wasn't what's happening. But unfortunately, Noah Williamson has been borderline unplayable. Currently, his foul rate per 40 minutes is 9.1. So he is committing 9.1 fouls per 40 minutes. To put that into perspective, he is, when we talked about Muhammad Wagi on that team. Muhammad Wagi was like a 10.1, right? So he's almost as bad as Muhammad Wagi was that year. And we remember Wagi fouled out of games in like 8 minutes, 7 minutes. That was a major issue with him. Like that's the biggest issue with Williamson. His hard hedges on the screens. He always does it in a way that causes fouls. Pretty much the only game that he was consistently good was that Kentucky game. If you don't get that out of him, simply put, he's not going to play. And I don't think that Bediako coming back changes that at all, right? I didn't think Williamson was going to play whether he came back or not, right? Like whether Bediako was able to come back, I thought that Williamson still had the same problem he has. If you're committing fouls, you're not going to play, right? And I think that's the major issue. The fouls, obviously, turnovers is a bit of a problem with him currently. You brought him in as a skilled 7-footer that could actually shoot the basketball. Currently, Noah Williamson on the season is 2 of 17 from 3. To put that into perspective, last season he was 28 of 88 at almost 32%. Season before that, he was 33%. So he was a pretty good 3-point shooter the last 2 seasons. He has been atrocious this season. Like I said, the free throw rate has been pretty bad. His rebound rate, he was a top 40 defensive rebounder last season. His rebound rate's like 11%. To put that into perspective, he almost has a worse defensive rebound rate than LeBaron Philon. He's worse than London Jemison. He's worse than Taylor and Amari and all the other front court guys. Jalil Bethea has a substantially better defensive rebound rate than him, right? There's more things than just, he commits fouls, right? Fouls is part of it, but he's not the shooter you thought he was going to be. He's not the rebounder you thought he was going to be. The stats said that he was going to be a decent rebounder. He was going to be a decent this. He was going to be a decent that. And he's just not been. And so because of that, when you combine all that together, that's the reason why Noah Williamson is going to sit. It has nothing to do with Bediako. Now, does Bediako mean that he's absolutely going to sit? But, yeah. But like I said, I personally am of the mindset that Williamson was going to sit one way or the other. Honestly, the other thing that he has a major issue with, and you see it if you pay attention during the games, if you're in attendance for sure, is that his conditioning is awful. And they've clearly tried to get his conditioning better. That's something we heard about in the offseason. His conditioning was pretty bad, but he struggles when we get out to run, and he just can't keep up. So it's not a situation where like Aiden Sherrill was able to play, I think, 31 minutes in the last game, if I remember correctly. Let's see. Yeah, against Oklahoma, he played 31 minutes. He played 24 both games before that. He's able to get out and actually run, and he's able to actually, put some real effort in on both sides of the floor. Noah just he's okay in bursts of like 2 to 3 minutes, and then his gas is just completely gone, and that hurts when you consider what Nate Oates' system is and what he wants it to be. Again, when you combine all those things, that's the reason why Noah's not playing, right? I don't want to, dump on the guy, but there's plenty of reasons why he's not getting on the floor. And you could make some of those same arguments for a guy like Keaton, right? I know technically he's injured right now, but a guy like Keaton, right? He has a worse, he almost has as bad of a foul rate as Noah. He's currently at almost 9 fouls per 40 minutes. He's 1 of 9 from 3. His rebound rate, his offensive rebound rate's actually pretty good. He's technically the best offensive rebounder on the team from a percentage standpoint. He's an okay defensive rebounder. He's, I guess, second on the team in defensive rebounding, behind Amari Allen. So he's a solid rebounder, but his fouls are pretty bad, and he's not shooting the ball well. So when you combine that with the fact that he's injured, that's why Keaton Bristow's not on the floor as much as he may potentially want to be, right? Like, there's just multiple things when you look at, especially Nate being an analytics guy, that when we look at you as what your stats say you are, right? That just gives us part of the picture. But then what you show us on the floor is a completely different picture, right? Noah, his stats said he was going to be one thing, which is the reason why he's on the team, quite frankly. And then what he's been on the floor has not been that guy. And so that's, now you have to coach to what he is, not what you thought he would be. And so I think that's what's holding him out. Now, if he gives you the effort and the ability that you saw in the Kentucky game, could he play more minutes in some games? Sure. Yeah. Like, if he gives you the minutes that you saw in that Kentucky game, if I go back to the Kentucky game, the Alabama-Kentucky game, Noel Williamson played 18 minutes. He goes 5 of 6 from inside the arc. He did airball his only 3. He, missed his free throw. He got 4 rebounds, 2 offensive, 2 defensive, got an assist. Was probably one of the only games he's played this season that he didn't commit a turnover. He had a block, had 2 steals, and had just 1 foul. And 1 foul in 18 minutes is by far his most minutes played without a foul. Or I guess with only 1 foul. The only other game that he did that well was the Mississippi State game. He only had 1 foul in 16 minutes. The Yale game, he played 11 minutes, had 4 fouls. UTSA, 11 minutes, 3 fouls. UNLV, 18 minutes, 4 fouls. 14 minutes, 3 fouls. 9 minutes, 3 fouls. There's been plenty of games where he just fouls too much, right? And when you're looking at somebody like that, it's just hard to put him on the floor. All right, guys. Well, we've gone a little over an hour today. I really appreciate y'all joining. Really appreciate the questions, Charles, C-Rob. Really do appreciate it. For anybody new here, like I said, I put out videos, 2 to 3 videos a week covering Alabama football, Alabama basketball. I do some live streams on occasions as I can. If you're interested in all the content, if you would subscribe to the channel, we would really appreciate it. As well, over on Twitter and on my website, which you'll find below, I do put out the pregame threads, breaking down Alabama's opponents on the basketball hardwood. I talk about all the different players that you need to know, as well as who my players to watch are, which is kind of who I think the player of the game is going to be on the Alabama side. And then I do give a score prediction. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, as well as follow me over on Twitter or check out the website. I really do appreciate everybody for joining. I really do appreciate it. This was kind of just to talk about the case, talk about everything that's been going on, because I do think it's been a crazy last 48 hours or so for Alabama. So thought there was a lot to talk about, and I really do appreciate y'all joining. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch y'all in the next episode. Peace.